Welcome to Customer Value Cast, a podcast dedicated to helping you acquire, retain, and expand more customers by putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle. Join our host, Ross Fulton, founder and CEO of ValueWise, as he dives deep into how recurring revenue businesses are maximizing their growth and valuations with the industry's leading experts and pioneers.
Hello, welcome to the latest episode of the Customer Value Cast from ValueWise, the show dedicated to putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle so your business can retain and expand more revenue from your customers. Very excited today to be joined by Allison Tiscornia from ChurnZero, Chief Customer Officer. Ali, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
Excited to get into our conversation today. We're going to start drilling into what is, I think, the perennial subject of early 2023. We're April 2023 right now, which is revenue accountability in customer success, and specifically around sort of skill sets and competencies that I think we're going to highlight as being very important and important to consider, certainly as a competency around a CS organization carrying or maybe starting to carry that revenue accountability. Quickly, for people who are watching, listening, who maybe haven't had a chance to connect with you or indeed ChurnZero before, share something, some background to yourself and your journey, and we'll go from there.
Great. So as you said, I'm the Chief Customer Officer of ChurnZero. ChurnZero is a customer success platform, as we know it in the industry, a CSP, right? We provide a lot of data and analytics and insights into the health of your customer base, and then we are able to action those indicators via automation, which is really cool and something that we need to be doing a lot more of in CS these days to align with this principle of more efficiency. In terms of my background, so this is my second role as a Chief Customer Officer, previous to ChurnZero, where I was in fact a customer. I was the Chief Customer Officer at Sendoso, and then also served as Vice President of Customer Services at Zenefits. Spent some time as a Senior Director at Medallia, and really have lived the post-sale life cycle. So I've done everything from biz ops in professional services to selling of professional services to customer success and support and implementation. So I have dabbled in it all from a post-sale perspective.
Awesome. An exciting journey and some great companies there that you've worked with. So let's get into our topic today. And as I say, it's framed in the macro, I'd say very potent topic in the industry today. I'd say a topic that still creates or still has quite a lot of division within it, and that is the theme of revenue accountability in customer success. Let's start there at that headline, and then we'll drill down to where we're going to go with thinking about skills and competencies associated with that accountability. But your thoughts, Ali, around this subject of revenue accountability in customer success? Good thing, bad thing? Where does it apply? Where should it apply? Where shouldn't it apply? Where do you stand on this topic?
So I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian, and I have a bit of a reputation for that. I think that it has been a mistake from the beginning of the concept of customer success that we ever talked about the idea that we couldn't be accountable for revenue. We, as customer success professionals, have the best relationship with the customer. They trust us. And as a trusted advisor, we are perfectly positioned to not only ask for the renewal and ask for the dollars associated for the renewal, but to also ask for the expansion. We have that relationship. We're already there with the customer. We should be asking for those dollars. And I think customers respect that. This idea that we had about becoming a trusted advisor, and that a trusted advisor meant that you couldn't ask for those things, or that you couldn't become part of a negotiation, or CSMs were too junior to handle commercial terms. I've had this debate with so many customer success professionals, and it's just I think it's really driven out of a little bit of fear, right? Fear that our customers will somehow look at us differently, or they won't respect us, or they won't share with us. And I just think that's a little bit too much of a fallacy that we put on ourselves.
Well, we love contrarians on this show, but for what it's worth,
I'm very strong in my opinions.
But for what it's worth, say if you're a contrarian, then so am I, because I fully agree, and I'd say the industry, the domain, and when B2B technology organizations investing in the principles and strategies of customer success, I think is weighting towards this, let's call it contrarian viewpoint around the accountability. And not to say that there aren't circles out there that certainly would regard that as that viewpoint as contrarian. I think there's almost genealogy in having that viewpoint where, like you say, you have this diversified, very potent set of experiences in terms of leading in different companies. I happen to have a background like that sort of stretches into more pre-sales, solution engineering, and sales. And I think organically there might be just an increased comfort level with the subject of revenue and accountability, which is maybe distinct from professionals. And this is not a critical statement at all, but it's just a qualitative observation, which is we've come through support, or we've come through your board in customer success, so to speak, professionally, and that's been the journey ever since. And have not necessarily just had that exposure to revenue and that type of accountability. Having an aversion or being wary of it is extremely understandable. But as you say, I think the economic forces today are demanding moving towards that accountability. And as you say, strategically, it makes to us makes a lot of sense anyway. But I think when we look at this still less than sort of 100% consistent industry around the subject, you start to then see a less than consistent and I'd say broad spectrum of competencies and skill sets within customer success organizations, within customer success managers in that role type specifically, around having that accountability for revenue and being able to perform under or with that accountability. On a very recent episode, we had Angel from Rockwell Automation, and we talked specifically about the compensation strategy that needs to be thought about if you're going to go down or are at this place around revenue accountability within your CS organization. Just as important to that incentivization strategy is, okay, what is the skill set? What are the competencies that we need in a CSM or a CS professional who's going to carry this revenue accountability? So we'd love to get a sort of jump off there, Ali. And when it comes to skill sets and competencies, and I know specifically negotiation is something that you're very, very, very sort of deeply knowledgeable about. But how do you see that skill set competency arena playing out around CSMs and revenue accountability?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. It's not just a matter of having good negotiation skills. I think that CSMs have to also be really good consultants, right? So they have to understand the product that they are representing, right? But they also have to understand the customer's business. And to be an advocate for your customer's business, you have to fundamentally understand what they do, what they're selling, what they're delivering, and why they've purchased your product, right? So I think CSMs really need to dive deeply in that concept of consulting. And as we start to see more AI and more efficiency with more technology plays, especially in CSPs, I really passionately believe that customer success professionals are going to become more consultant-like, and they're going to have a lot less to do with, sending out emails and doing the touch-based conversation, even doing QBRs. There's going to be a lot more automation related to QBRs. You're going to be sending those things out digitally. So the value that a customer success professional is going to bring to the table is really helping customers understand how to to optimize and adopt products. And the only way to optimize and adopt a product is fundamentally if you understand your customer's business. It's really about consulting 101. And then I think that leads, anytime you're a good consultant, you're going to be a good negotiator, right? Because I don't think that CSMs are just negotiating. And I think this is the piece that they sometimes forget in this fear of being responsible for revenue is they're already negotiating, right? They're already negotiating with their customers over, support tickets or support responses, or think about the fact that when the customer wants something different from a product, right? There's a feature negotiation, right? You have to go in and yes, you're going to advocate to the product team for your customer, but then you have to go back to the customer and negotiate why a product isn't actually going to deliver on the feature that your customer wants, right? And still let them know that it's not the end of the world and we're still providing value to you, even though we aren't going to be able to deliver on that particular feature. That's a negotiation.
Yeah. Going back to the point around the consulting, again, I'll just keep using the word competencies in that customer success professional profile. Would you draw a parallel or say this is connected to this concept of the evolution of a CSM or a CS professional from being a kind of generalist role to a specialist role? Because I guess being able to approach this slightly from a meta perspective, running a consulting company in the customer success space, certainly knowing or believing what is important from a consulting perspective is specialism. It is specialist knowledge and not being just that generalist consultant who knows a bit about a lot of things, but isn't really sort of the leading expert specialist in really how you kind of get to this outcome or solve this particular problem. If you run with that and apply that as a consulting dynamic to then a CSM, you start to think about more specialist CSMs versus the generalist CSMs. Would you say that?
Oh, I completely agree. I think that is the future. They are definitely going to have to build more of those competencies related to specialties within the product, specialties within industries, specialties within verticals. Absolutely. That is the future, and that is where they're going to start to excel in their careers. Yeah, the days of the generalist, I think, are probably kind of over or diminishing quite a bit. It's really all about what is the specific piece of information or value that you can bring to your customer that is going to drive the future of customer success.
And I pull on that thread a little more. And there's been, I will say, the last couple of years, especially the last year, a surge in a skill set and almost a domain that's been around since enterprise tech has been around value engineering, and I'll call it value consulting to connect it back to this conversation thread. But in the last year to 2 years, there's been this surge resurgence around value engineering teams, value consulting teams, etc. And accordingly, the skill set and the competencies in a role around being able to do, in quotation marks, value consulting, value engineering. I mean, we have a value engineering competency in our framework in ValueWise because we do think this is a very important skill set and capability. When you, Ali, talk about consulting and that consulting capability in a CSM, would you connect it to, at least partially, to that value consulting concept? Or?
Absolutely, right? I mean, one of the things that we in CS have to drive, and it's interesting when you see this with junior teams, is they really need to understand the business. And I understand that can be very hard when you maybe have to carry a very large book of business, but that is what's going to set you apart from anybody else. And so if you understand why the customer bought your product and you understand the efficiency that they're trying to drive with your product, and to be able to look kind of a little bit outside of the box of just what the product is going to deliver, but what the business is doing, yeah, that is absolutely the next step, I think, for customer success professionals. I think you really have to, again, I don't want to keep, it's hard to not keep going down this path of, but why did they buy? Like they're trying to obviously solve a problem. And it feels very much like we skip over that in a lot of, in the sales handoff. I always go back to that at the end of the day. Why did they buy us? Why did they buy us? What are they trying to do? Let's try to keep it simple, but let's understand why did they buy us? And it's funny because that seems like a very simple question to answer. And yet I've seen multiple times where salespeople and CS people will struggle to sharply articulate why a customer buys the product.
Oh, 100%. And I think,
and sorry, Ross,
no,
but to just finish up on the value engineering point, it's kind of like, how are you going to be able to deliver value? How are you going to be able to talk about the value of your product if you don't actually know what you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think very connected to that is the reality where, again, in B2B, especially companies selling into later stage through the enterprise B2B companies, the buyer who might know why they bought this is not necessarily the person who's accountable and is the stakeholder, let alone the actual user, in adopting what has been bought. And so it's all very well potentially knowing, okay, this is why they bought. This was the value sale that was made at point of purchase, or maybe even in an expansion purchase context. But now this set of stakeholders and set of users who are now, I need to get adopting this purchase and realizing value from it. Do they know why? No.
They may not. You're right.
In too many cases, no. And so again, to your point, it behooves the customer success professional, the post-sales roles to be able to perform that value consulting, because it's often, okay, we got to do this again, and a lot of that gets connected as a subject to, well, it's because the value sale and the agreement around value wasn't properly transitioned from sales to post-sales, from sales to customer success. And yes, that doesn't get done well in a lot of companies. But even if it is done well, it's often a transition of IP around the account and around sort of their perception of value for related to stakeholders who aren't actually that prominent around the actual adoption journey and the value realization. And so we've got to do it again anyway. And so having this skill set is, I think, I agree, it's the future. It's something we're seeing and sort of helping out as value-wise, and increasingly plan on doing that because we're seeing the demand and we're seeing the need.
And to go back to the point that you raised about, what are those skills? So to me, a really good consultant is all about asking questions and feeling comfortable in asking questions, right? And I think sometimes that's another thing I see of CS professionals is they feel like they need to have all the answers as opposed to just being curious. Let's just be curious. And one of the things I find so interesting and exciting about working with customers is they love to talk about their product. They love to talk about their product and service, get them to talk about their product and service, right? And to your point, if the stakeholder understands why they bought, but the people who are actually doing the implementation don't necessarily see that or understand that, ask the question, and ask for the meeting from the buyer. It's okay to ask those questions and to keep, I think, honestly repeating, are we still on the same path, right? Because business changes, right? Goals, objectives, KPIs, things change in a business. You've got to continue to bring that back up. Are we in fact, tracking any kind of progress to why you bought this in the first place? Are we actually achieving your goals? And if not, maybe the goal has changed. So let's reevaluate and let's have another discussion about that.
Yeah.
Which again, that's what consultants do, and they do really, really well.
I think totally agree. I think so. So let's. I took us slightly off piste, as I tend to do on the show. But let's go back to revenue accountability skill sets,
Yes.
which is certainly very relevant to this consulting and value consulting competency. But negotiation, I think it's fascinating because it is not and when we were preparing to record this episode and you suggested, hey, well, let's talk about this. I'm like, oh wow, that's super interesting. You don't hear that much conversation, or at least I don't, around negotiation skills in customer success in CSMs. You don't hear that as a often conversation, but it's a common conversation. But it's a very interesting subject, and you outlined some, I guess, scenarios where, hey, here's where negotiation would be important. Any thoughts around why, I guess, you looked at your, I'd say, typical, which may not be even a thing that exists, but a typical customer success manager skills matrix or assessment type of template, you don't tend to see negotiation on it? Why do you think that is?
Because I think it kind of goes back to this, how we started and how we marketed the concept of customer success, and that somehow relationship management, which I hate that term, but relationship management doesn't involve, any kind of negotiation. I don't know how you have any kind of relationship with any human being, whether it be business or personal, and there not be some level of negotiation that has to take place, right? And I think in coming up in my career, I had a leader once who joked, of course, about you're always be selling, right? Always be closing. But the reality is that's what we do every day on a daily basis. We're always selling. We're either selling ourselves, we're selling a product, we're selling our business. I mean, that's just what we do in our daily life. So this idea that somehow because you were the quarterback of the account, or you were involved in relationship management, that you weren't going to have a negotiation with a customer. And I think that people took that to, again, this concept of a trusted advisor. How can you be a trusted advisor if you're not having a negotiation with somebody, right? A negotiation simply means that you're trying to walk away with the best outcome for both parties. Really, like, that's a successful negotiation. If both parties walk away feeling like they've gotten something out of the discussion, they've walked away with something that they want, that's a successful negotiation, right? That is relationship management. That is a part of being a trusted advisor. I think we just need to be much more bold in stating that. And I think there's been just, always been this kind of negative, this negative impact between sales and post-sales, right? And there's always this, this friction between the two organizations. And I'm kind of like, I've never understood why, because at the end of the day, we can't exist in post-sales if our friends in sales aren't selling, right? So at the end of the day, we need to be much more supportive of each other. And again, I think also from a customer perspective, it's just, it's better not to be handed off to so many different people. Like, oh, well, I can't talk commercial terms with you. I can only talk to you about the value of the product and how to optimize it and how to adopt it. And then you have to talk to this other person when we actually go through and deal with terms. That doesn't make sense, and I don't think that's a good customer experience either.
No. I think there's as a customer, it's arguably sort of disconcerting to not be challenged by my service provider, because I'm like, well, right. I don't have all the answers, and I want you to. I mean, there's a difference between outright disagreeing and being told I'm wrong, which I think is an absolutely appropriate thing for a customer success professional to do with a customer. But there's the more maybe middle ground, which is, okay, we don't fully agree or can't fully meet that, let's negotiate. I wonder if some of this absence, or at least lack of prioritization around negotiating skills in CS, is attached to this almost very, very fundamental concept of service. And like, well, we're here to serve the customer. This is customer service. And when you serve a customer, you're providing a service, we start to get to consumer mindsets, and we think of, okay, I've got a server in a restaurant, and you don't typically have a server negotiate with you. I mean, I could say, well, what about this scenario, that scenario? But generally, it's like, okay, I'm just going to do whatever this person needs me to do in the context of being their server in this restaurant. And I wonder how much of that has been sort of carried over, inherited organically or otherwise into customer success, and to say, well, no, we're here to serve, we're not here to negotiate. Because that negotiation, the other word that springs to mind for me when I think negotiation is partnership. In that, like, I negotiate quotation marks with my wife on a daily basis because we have a partnership. I often lose those negotiations, but I try. And like business partnerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking again of this dynamic between customer and vendor, and specifically customer success professional in that vendor and customer as a partnership, and therefore you negotiate, is maybe a lens that you can use to sort of start to create a comfort level with this theme of negotiation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think you're right in that we came from this background of service. So the idea is, okay, well, we're in service of the customer, which means, I guess the translation, though, to me, I struggle, even having been in services, customer service, is that doesn't always mean, there's a saying that the customer is always the customer, but the customer isn't always right. So even if we are in service of the customer, we still have to do the best thing for the customer. And they don't always know the best thing, because again, we're going to know the product, or we're going to know the service much better than the customer ever could, right? So it does go back to your point about partnership. I think that's a really good way to state it. You can't have any kind of partnership without negotiation.
Yeah. So I want to get down to this, some more actionable I guess takeaways here for people listening and watching around this negotiation theme. And I want to loop back first to just to play back, I think, what was some very important points and examples you were giving around what are the scenarios over the course of a customer life cycle or customer journey that a CSM might be managing, where negotiation skills is especially important, because I think that provides a bit of a sort of sub framework for either a CSM or CS professional listening to this, or indeed a leader listening or watching this, to say, okay, there's an architecture I can go back into my company and say, hey, these 3, 4, 5 milestones or events in our customer's journey, they're super important. They include the need to be able to negotiate. Therefore, let's invest and take some time to develop some negotiation skills. So giving them that architecture, that framework, I think is super helpful. So one example you gave was product feature requests, which I think is a really good one. Maybe drill into that and just replay some of the other examples you gave earlier.
Yeah, so I think that obviously you're going to be negotiating when the customer wants specific features, especially when they're not on the roadmap, right? So you have to be an advocate for the product team as well, and explain to your customer why that's not going to happen, but still driving the benefit and the value that they're already seeing from the platform. I think in terms of implementation, there's always a negotiation, always in implementation, right? Because there is the dream that is sold in sales. And this is not any, this is not any ill intent or ill will to my sales counterparts, but of course there's this vision that is provided to a customer. And then in implementation, we have to come in and we have to give you the reality of what we can feasibly do in this moment in time, right? That's a negotiation as well. So implementation folks need to have those negotiation skills. And then I think there's always, if you have a separate implementation team, which I hope that those listening do, there is a bit of a negotiation that has to take place once implementation is done, right? Because inevitably the customer feels comfortable with implementation, their implementation people, and they want to always reach out to those people to answer questions, especially technical questions, as opposed to moving on to support or talking to their CSM, right? And then there's always the negotiation around what happens at renewal, right? And being able to ask that question, we're 120 days out from the renewal, but if I asked you today, Ross, are you ready to renew? You've got to be able to ask that question. That's a negotiation right there. Maybe you're not. Great. Let's have this conversation about what we need to do to get you to renew, or, what is it that we're missing, right? So that's a negotiation. And then obviously when you start to talk about different features and different products that the customer could benefit from, right? Immediately, I do this when vendors come to me. I'm like, well, but I'm already paying you X amount of dollars. Why is this an additional fee? You should just be giving this to me for free because I'm a fantastic customer. Yes, you are, Allie, a fantastic customer. But in fact, this is a business and here's the value you're going to receive from this additional product. So, I mean, it really, you're negotiating through the entire life cycle, customer life cycle, whether you realize it or not.
Mm-hmm. That's some great examples there to, at least sort of, maybe enable a leader to prioritize. Okay, let's really make sure we're armed with the right negotiating skills, playbooks. There's something you never see really. Is like, where's my negotiating playbook in customer success? We might have risk playbooks, etc. Which again, you can argue contain elements or seeds, or should contain seeds of negotiating, but you don't ever see a negotiating playbook.
Playbooks.
So let's get to that. Any recommendations on resources? Just like places to go for either maybe a CSM listening to this, or indeed a leader listening to this, looking for resources maybe to use themselves for their team or give to their team around negotiating skills, books, frameworks, methodologies, anything you'd recommend?
There's so much out there. I don't even know where I would start, but here's what I would say to any CS leader who is listening. I would go to your CRO, or I'd go to your VP of sales and say, the next time you do a sales training, please let my team come and join in. And here's why. It's going to be a better relationship for us between sales and customer success. It's going to be a better experience for the customer. And it's just going to drive more efficiency in terms of who's going to be responsible for those numbers. So go make, you're already friends with your CRO or your VP of sales, but to say that you want to invest in your team and have them take the same training that your salespeople are taking. Every time I've done that with a CRO or a VP of sales, they always kind of look at me and they're like, that's a great idea. Yeah, I really like that. That's a great idea. Yeah, we should do that. It's also more cost effective. The CFO loves it, right? Yes, you're training more people, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a bigger benefit to the company. So that would be my first pass. And then the second thing is that, there's so much out there. I don't know that I have one methodology that I would recommend. I think it really starts with whatever, sales methodology your sales leader is using. I would just make sure that you're leveraging that in the post-sale world as well.
I think it's a great connection there between this negotiating skill set and sales methodologies, because not by far not all of them, but some out there do have some really good content and models that really tie to this negotiation theory, like the Challenger sales methodology. I mean, it's almost in the name, challenge,
right.
AKA negotiate, and even Sandler, etc. They all have a lot of this baked in. So I think that's a really good actionable one. And
then my other recommendation is not necessarily a methodology, but I think it's the thing we like least probably in CS. Call coaching, as much call coaching as you can do, and role playing. Whenever you have your team meetings, get a CSM to get up there with a difficult negotiation and play it through, role play. I know it's uncomfortable. We all hate it. Oh, don't pick on me to do the role playing. But the more role playing you do, the better you get at it. The more comfortable you get at it, the less emotion is involved in it. And I think it also helps the CSM to understand that, you're not being a bad advocate because you have to have a difficult conversation and because you have to, negotiate.
Yeah. No, that coaching and leveraging Gong for like conversational intelligence around, okay, how are my CSMs really performing on the negotiation front? It's very, very doable. We're doing some exciting stuff around that type of concept across a number of CS or sort of customer value competencies, and negotiating would be a great example of that. But yeah, as you say, for anyone watching, listening, there's a plethora of other resources out there on the subject of negotiation, B2B negotiation. I mean, I personally am just wrapping up reading the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, who's the FBI hostage negotiator. And I think it's a very famous book, arguably a somewhat cliched recommendation today, but it is a really good book. I found it super actionable, and the way it's structured, totally you can lift that and say, okay, here's how you could apply that to dealing with negotiating with customers across many of the scenarios you outlined before, Ali. So let's wrap it up there. I think that's a good set of takeaways for our listeners and viewers. Ali, if anyone would like to connect with you and continue this conversation or ask any other questions, how can people best connect with you?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Allison Tiscornia, and you can also reach out to me directly at ChurnZero at atiscornia@ChurnZero.com.
Perfect. Well, Ali, really appreciate your time today and all your insights. Super interesting. Very, very, very helpful. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for the discussion, Ross. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And for everyone watching, listening, thanks for joining us. Again, check out www.valuewise.co for lots of resources covering a lot of the subjects we and Ali and I talked about today. And in the meantime, value-wise yourself, value-wise your customers, and we'll see you next time.